Most men go to sea seeking fortune or freedom. I went because I was the best liar in 3 counties, and the land had grown too hot to hold me. My name is Silas Thorne, and in 1799, I found myself in Port Royal with a new name and a desperate need for a ship that asked no questions. I found her in the Sea Dragon, a brig so notoriously leaky and ill-crewed that only the desperate or the damned would sail on her. Her captain, a hulking brute named Morgan, cared only for 2 things: the gold I promised him at journey's end, and the strange, non-magnetic lodestone I carried in a velvet pouch. The lodestone was my ticket. A French naturalist in Port-au-Prince had paid me half the fee up front to deliver it to a colleague in New Orleans. It defies all known properties of magnetism, he'd whispered, his eyes alight with a feverish gleam. It points not to north, but to something else, something greater. To me, it was just a rock, a means to an end. Our voyage began under a cloud of suspicion. The crew was a patchwork of cutthroats and fugitives, and they watched me, the gentleman scholar, with open contempt. But their contempt turned to wary fascination when, on the 3rd day out, I produced the lodestone to amuse myself. I'd suspended it on a silk thread, and instead of aligning north, it spun in a lazy circle before pointing steadfastly southeast. A grizzled old navigator named Jacob spat on the deck. "That's devil's work," he muttered. "No good will come of it." He was right. That night, the first man died. A seasoned sailor simply vanished from the night watch. The only trace left behind was his clay pipe, still warm, placed neatly on the deck where he'd been standing. Panic, cold and sharp, began to seep into the crew. Captain Morgan, however, was not a man prone to panic. He was prone to greed. He'd been watching the lodestone, a new, calculating light in his eyes. After the second disappearance, a man lost from the crow's nest, his safety line neatly severed, Morgan cornered me in my cabin. "The stone," he growled, his breath reeking of rum. "It's not pointing to a place. It's pointing to a prize, isn't it? Some lost treasure." I was about to spin a lie, to agree and buy myself time, when the ship gave a sudden, violent lurch. We spilled out onto the deck to find a fog so thick and white it felt like being swallowed by a cloud. The air grew cold, and the only sound was the frantic beating of our own hearts. And then, through the mist, we saw them. Shadows, tall, slender, and impossibly silent, moving along our rails as if inspecting their catch. Jacobs, the old navigator, fell to his knees. "The silent ones," he whispered, his voice cracking with a terror so profound it infected us all. "They follow the compass of the world lie. It calls them." In that moment, the Frenchman's words, "It points not to north, but to something else," crashed over me with horrifying clarity. It didn't point to treasure. It pointed to the greatest lie. And I, Silas Thorne, was the greatest liar aboard. I was the beacon. The shadows began to solidify, their forms shifting like smoke. They had no faces, only a deep, pulling emptiness. They were drawn to deception, to the untruth that was my very essence. The crew, sensing this, turned on me. "It's him," they shouted. "He brought this on us." But as they advanced, Captain Morgan did something I never expected. He drew his cutlass and stood between me and the mob. "The boy and his rock are our only way out of this," he roared. "You think they'll let you live once you've tossed him overboard? We're in the trap together." He was buying time, but for what? He shoved me back toward my cabin. The stone, make it point true to anything real. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the velvet pouch. The shadows were seeping through the bulwarks now, the very wood of the ship groaning under their touch. The crew's shouts were turning to screams. I held the lodestone, this compass of the world lie, and I knew Jacobs was right. It fed on falsehood. The only way to break its power was with a truth so absolute, so undeniable, that it would shatter the lie. I wasn't a gentleman. I wasn't a scholar. I was a liar, a cheat, and a coward. And in that moment, I was terrified. I stumbled back onto the deck, the stone dangling from its thread. I held it aloft, and I did not speak a grand incantation or a clever ruse. I spoke the only truth I had left, my voice a broken thing against the silence. My name is Silas Thorne. I cried out to the faceless shadows. I'm a liar. I am afraid. The lodestone, which had been spinning wildly, suddenly stopped. It gave one final, violent shudder and then swung, for the first time, to point directly and unerringly north. A sound like a shattered bell echoed through the fog. The shadows wavered, their forms unraveling like thread. The mist began to thin, and the oppressive cold lifted. Within minutes, the sea was calm, the sky was clear, and we were alone. We limped into New Orleans a week later, a shattered crew on a haunted ship. I delivered the lodestone, now inert and cold, and collected my fee. I never saw Captain Morgan or the crew of the Sea Dragon again. I left the sea after that. I use my talent for lies now to sell legitimate goods, and I sleep soundly in a bed that does not roll with the waves. I learned that the ocean holds more than storms and sea monsters. It holds reflections of our own souls. And for a man like me, that was the most terrifying depth of all.